April 18, 1943. Kahili Airfield, Bougainville Island. Lieutenant Commander Takeshi Mori stood beside his Mitsubishi A6M0, watching the morning sun rise over the Solomon Sea. He was 31 years old. He had shot down 14 enemy aircraft. He understood air combat as well as any pilot in the Imperial Japanese Navy. His squadron had received intelligence reports about a new American fighter, twin-engine design, unconventional configuration, the P-38 Lightning. The Japanese pilots dismissed it entirely. Mori had seen photographs. The P-38 looked wrong. 2 engines on extended booms, twin-tail configuration. It violated every principle of fighter design the Japanese understood. A fighter should be light. A fighter should be maneuverable. The Zero embodied these principles perfectly. It could outturn any fighter in the world. The Americans kept trying heavier aircraft. The P-40 Warhawk was too slow. The F-4F Wildcat was too heavy. Now they were trying a twin-engine fighter that looked like a cargo plane. Mori told his pilots that morning to attack it like a bomber. Get close. The big aircraft would not turn. One good shot and it would be finished. What Mori did not know was that 16 P-38s were already in the air, flying toward him at 340 miles per hour. They were hunting Admiral Yamamoto, and in 12 hours Lieutenant Commander Takeshi Mori would be dead, shot down by an aircraft he had been told was too clumsy to fight. February 1939. Lockheed Aircraft Corporation, Burbank, California. Clarence Kelly Johnson was 28 years old. He was brilliant, difficult, and convinced that conventional thinking limited American capabilities. The Army Air Corps wanted a high-altitude interceptor, 360 miles per hour at 20,000 feet, climb to 20,000 feet in 6 minutes, range of at least 1,000 miles. No single-engine fighter could meet these specifications. Johnson proposed using 2 engines. Every engineer told him it would not work. Twin-engine fighters were heavy and slow. They could not compete with single-engine fighters in dogfights. Johnson argued that the specifications did not call for a dogfighter. They called for an interceptor. He designed an aircraft unlike anything that had been built before. The configuration solved multiple problems. Mount 2 engines on extended booms. Place the pilot in a central nacelle. Connect the booms to twin-tail surfaces. All guns mounted in the nose, firing without synchronization gear. Twin-boom configuration allowed clean airflow. Tricycle landing gear eliminated visibility problems. Johnson completed the design in 3 months. The Army selected Lockheed's proposal on June 23, 1939. The prototype flew on January 27, 1940. It reached 413 miles per hour. No American fighter had ever flown that fast. Then disaster struck. On February 11th, both engines failed during a transcontinental flight attempt. The prototype crashed. The only aircraft was destroyed. The Army ordered 13 service test aircraft anyway. They needed high-performance fighters desperately. Johnson redesigned based on lessons learned. The first production aircraft flew in September 1940. The compressibility issue remained. At speeds above 450 miles per hour in a dive, the controls became ineffective. Johnson installed dive flaps that deployed automatically at high speed. Production accelerated after Pearl Harbor. Lockheed built a new factory specifically for P-38 manufacturing. But the aircraft was needed immediately in the Pacific. Japanese forces had swept across the region. Wake Island fallen, Philippines falling, Singapore would fall. The Japanese achieved victories through air superiority. The Zero dominated every aircraft it encountered. American pilots flying P-39s and P-40S could not compete. American tactics did not work against the Zero. The first P-38s arrived in the Pacific in April 1942. They deployed to Alaska, where Japanese forces occupied islands in the Aleutians. On August 4, 1942, two P-38s encountered four Japanese flying boats over Alaskan waters. Lieutenant Stanley Long shot down two. Lieutenant Robert Biesecker shot down a third. The P-38's first confirmed victories. September 1942. Guadalcanal, Solomon Islands. Marines had seized the Japanese airfield on August 7th. The battle for Guadalcanal would determine control of the Solomon Islands. The Japanese flew missions from Rabaul, over 550 miles northwest, at the extreme limit of zero range. The first P-38s arrived at Henderson Field in November 1942. Japanese pilots saw the new fighter and dismissed it. Too large. Twin engines made it look like a bomber. They were wrong. On November 18th, Captain Tom Lanphier was flying patrol when he encountered 12 Zeros escorting bombers toward Henderson Field. Lanphier positioned 5,000 feet above the Japanese formation. He rolled into a diving attack, accelerating to over 400 miles per hour. His guns opened fire at 200 yards. One Zero exploded, another began smoking. Lanphier pulled out and climbed away. The Zeros tried to follow. They could not catch him. Lanphier repositioned, dove again, destroyed another Zero, and escaped. The engagement lasted 4 minutes. He shot down 2 Zeros without taking damage. Japanese pilots who returned to Rabaul reported something unexpected. The twin-engine American fighter was fast. It could dive faster than a Zero. It could climb faster. And it carried heavy firepower concentrated in the nose. The P-38's guns were aligned along the center line. Every weapon fired at the same point. The aircraft could engage from 400 yards, double the Zero's effective range. Japanese commanders believed the advantages were temporary. Force it into turning combat, and the Zero's agility would dominate. But American pilots were learning not to fight that way. The P-38 gave them options the Zero could not match. If a Japanese pilot forced a turning engagement, the P-38 extended away at high speed. If a Zero tried to dive away, the P-38 followed and caught it. The Japanese had designed their fighter to win through maneuverability. The Americans had designed their fighter to win through energy management. By January 1943, more P-38s arrived in theatre. Among the pilots was Richard Bong from Wisconsin, 22 years old, a natural pilot with extraordinary reflexes. Bong flew his first combat mission on December 27, 1942. He was patrolling over Boona when he encountered Zeros attacking Australian troops. Bong dove into the fight, fired at the nearest Zero from 300 yards, and watched it catch fire. His first kill took less than 3 seconds. Over 2 years, Richard Bong would shoot down 40 enemy aircraft, more than any other American pilot in any theatre. The other legendary ace was Thomas Maguire. He arrived in March 1943. 23 years old, aggressive, competitive. By the end of the war, Maguire would be credited with 38 confirmed victories. Together, Bong and Maguire destroyed 78 Japanese aircraft. But the aircraft's defining moment would come in April 1943. The mission to kill Admiral Yamamoto, April 13, 1943. Navy Cryptanalysis Station, Pearl Harbor. American code breakers intercepted a transmission detailing Admiral Yamamoto's inspection tour. Yamamoto was the architect of Pearl Harbor, Japan's most capable naval strategist. His loss would be devastating. The message provided specific details. Yamamoto would depart Rabaul at 600 hours on April 18th. He would fly in a bomber escorted by 6 Zeros. He would land at Balale Airfield at 935 hours. The Americans had the date, time, and exact flight path. But the target was over 450 miles from Guadalcanal. The mission was at the extreme limit of P-38 range. No other American fighter could reach that far. Admiral Nimitz approved the mission, code name Operation Vengeance. The 13th Air Force selected 18 P-38 pilots. Captain Thomas Lanphier would lead the attack element. Major John Mitchell would lead the cover element. The planning was meticulous. They would fly a circuitous route over the ocean, maintain strict radio silence, cruise at 50 feet to avoid radar, each P-38 configured for maximum range. 2 drop tanks, full internal fuel. Power settings calculated to maximize efficiency. Even with maximum fuel, the mission required perfect execution. Any deviation would consume extra fuel. The return flight would have minimal reserves. If anything went wrong, pilots would run out of fuel over the ocean. The pilots understood the risks. The chance to kill Yamamoto was worth it. April 18, 1943, 0700 hours. Guadalcanal. 18 P-38s took off from Henderson Field. Major Mitchell led the formation west over the ocean. They stayed at 50 feet altitude. After 90 minutes, land appeared ahead. Bougainville Island. Mitchell checked his watch. 933 hours. 2 minutes early and exactly on course. Mitchell signaled to climb. The P-38s pulled up to 15,000 feet. At 935 hours, exactly on schedule, 2 aircraft appeared ahead. 1 bomber, 6 Zeros in escort. Yamamoto was on that bomber. The attack element broke away and dove toward the Japanese formation. The Zeros saw them coming. They broke into the attack. Lieutenant Rex Barber continued his dive toward the bomber. The bomber had descended to treetop level, attempting to escape. Barber followed, closed to 100 yards, and opened fire. His guns struck the bomber's right engine and wing root. The bomber began trailing smoke, lost altitude, then crashed into the jungle and exploded. Yamamoto was killed instantly. 3 Zeros were shot down. 1 P-38 was lost. The surviving aircraft turned south and flew back to Guadalcanal. Every aircraft that survived made it back, though several landed with less than 30 gallons of fuel. The mission took 3 hours and 40 minutes. Total distance over 900 miles. The longest fighter intercept attempted to that date. Yamamoto's death was not announced for several weeks. The Japanese understood the psychological impact. His loss was devastating to morale. The mission proved several things decisively. The P-38 had the range to conduct deep strike missions far beyond any other fighter. American intelligence and planning could execute precision operations. Japanese air defenses could be penetrated even in areas considered secure. The psychological impact on Japanese forces was profound. If the Americans could kill Yamamoto, they could reach anyone, anywhere. Japanese commanders began reassessing their evaluation of the P-38, but the reassessment came too late. American production was accelerating. More squadrons were converting to the Lightning. By mid-1943, P-38s operated throughout the Pacific Theater. The aircraft continued to evolve. The J model introduced improved engines, increased fuel capacity, better cockpit heating. Maximum speed increased to 414 miles per hour. Rate of climb improved to 3,000 feet per minute. Service ceiling reached 44,000 feet. With external tanks, range extended beyond 1,400 miles. Japanese commanders observed these capabilities with growing alarm. The Americans had created a fighter that could not be stopped by tactics that had worked against earlier aircraft. The Zero's advantages were nullified by the P-38's energy tactics. Japanese pilots could not force turning fights. They could not catch it in dives. They could not escape it in climbs. By late 1943, Japanese fighter units were suffering unsustainable losses. Experienced pilots were being killed. Replacement pilots arrived with minimal training. American pilot training was improving. New pilots arrived with hundreds of flight hours. The experience level of American squadrons was increasing. By 1944, American pilots were shooting down Japanese aircraft at ratios of 5-to-1 or better. The P-38 was central to this shift. The aircraft gave American pilots a platform that allowed them to engage on their terms. Richard Bong continued accumulating victories. By December 1944, he had 40 confirmed kills. He was sent home. Thomas Maguire continued flying after Bong departed. By January 1945, Maguire had 38 victories, 2 behind Bong. On January 7, 1945, Maguire was leading 4 P-38s over Negros Island when they encountered a Japanese fighter at low altitude. Maguire attacked aggressively. He violated the energy tactics that had kept him alive. He got into a turning fight at low altitude. The P-38's external tanks were still attached. The additional weight made the aircraft sluggish. Maguire pulled too hard, too slow. The P-38 stalled, rolled inverted, and crashed. Thomas Maguire was killed instantly. He was 24 years old. His death demonstrated that even after 2 years of combat, the P-38 required disciplined flying. By early 1945, the strategic situation had shifted decisively. American forces had advanced across the Pacific. The Philippines were being liberated. Japanese air forces were collapsing. Fuel shortages restricted operations. Experienced pilots were gone. The P-38 continued operating through the final months. But newer fighters were arriving. The P-51 Mustang offered comparable range with better high-altitude performance. Production ended in August 1945. Total production reached 10,037 aircraft. The P-38 served in every theatre. In the Pacific, it destroyed more Japanese aircraft than any other American fighter. Final tallies credited P-38 pilots with shooting down over 1,800 Japanese aircraft in air combat. Another 700 destroyed on the ground. American P-38 losses totaled approximately 1,300 aircraft in the Pacific, including all causes. The exchange ratio was overwhelmingly favorable, but numbers alone do not capture the P-38's significance. The aircraft changed Japanese strategic calculations. Before the P-38, Japanese commanders believed their defensive perimeter was secure. American fighters lacked the range to reach deep into Japanese territory. The P-38 proved them wrong. The psychological impact was devastating. Japanese pilots knew the twin-engine fighter could appear anywhere. There was nowhere to hide. The aircraft gave American pilots confidence. They knew they were flying an aircraft that could win fights. That confidence translated into aggressive tactics and successful outcomes. The P-38's legacy extended beyond the war. The engineering innovations influenced jet fighter design, the twin-engine configuration, the tricycle landing gear, the centralized armament. Kelly Johnson went on to create the Lockheed Skunk Works, the U-2, the SR-71 Blackbird, the F-117, all carried design DNA from the P-38. Richard Bong did not survive to see the end. On August 6, 1945, the same day the atomic bomb destroyed Hiroshima, Bong was killed in a jet fighter accident. He was 24 years old. The P-38 faded from service rapidly after the war. Jet fighters made piston engines obsolete. By 1950, few P-38s remained operational. Military historians analyzing the combat record concluded the Lightning had been one of the most effective fighters of World War II. It had not been the fastest, it had not been the most maneuverable, but it had possessed the exact combination of capabilities needed to win the air war in the Pacific: range, speed, climb rate, firepower, reliability. The Japanese commanders who had mocked the twin-engine design learned their error at terrible cost. They had judged the aircraft by appearance rather than capability. The P-38 proved that innovation could overturn established doctrine. The aircraft looked wrong. It violated every rule, but it worked. Wars are not won by adhering to doctrine. They are won by finding solutions to problems. The problem was that American fighters could not match the Zero's maneuverability and could not reach deep into Japanese territory. The P-38 solved both problems. April 18, 1943. The same day, Yamamoto died. Lieutenant Commander Takeshi Mori engaged P-38s over Bougainville that afternoon. He tried to force them into turning combat where his Zero's agility would dominate. The American pilots refused to cooperate. They fought their way, high-speed passes, zoom climbs, energy tactics. Maury died in the engagement. His Zero was hit by 50 caliber fire from a P-38 he never saw. He was one of thousands of Japanese pilots who learned too late that the twin-engine American fighter was not clumsy. It was lethal. The fork-tailed devil. That is what the Germans called it. The name fit. An aircraft that should not exist, but did. It flew when Japanese commanders said it would be too slow. It fought when they said it would be too clumsy. It won when they said it would be too vulnerable. The aircraft that was mocked became the aircraft that dominated. Kelly Johnson and his team had created something unprecedented. An aircraft that existed because someone had been willing to ignore conventional wisdom. The pilots who flew it proved that technology alone does not win wars. Technology combined with training, with tactics, with courage, wins wars. All these lessons, learned in combat over the Pacific, shaped military aviation for generations. The P-38 Lightning was not just an aircraft, it was proof that innovation defeats tradition, that unconventional solutions work if the engineering is sound. Japanese commanders learned this truth. They learned it watching their pilots die. They learned it watching their air superiority erode. They learned it watching American fighters appear over targets they believed were safe. They learned it too late to change the outcome. The twin-engine fighter they had mocked had become the weapon that dominated the Pacific skies. The fork-tailed devil had proven itself in the only test that mattered: combat. And in combat, the P-38 Lightning had been supreme.